Hello there, I'm George Marshall and welcome to my course Garage Orchestra, the Fundamentals of MIDI Orchestration. I will be introducing myself more fully in the next video, so in this one I will be focusing on the course itself with the aim of giving some preliminary information to those who are about to embark on the course. I've also made this video available for preview so as to inform those who might be considering purchasing it, helping them come to a conclusion of whether it is the right course for them. So the tagline for this course, as you may or may not have seen in the description, is creating better with less to create the best with more. What do I mean by this? Well, music has arguably always been about technology, such as the development of instruments, acoustics, and now computer software and hardware. This is fantastic as it creates an exciting area of artistic creation. However, it can also be daunting as modern technology, while empowering, is not necessarily intuitive. Therefore, the learning curve is increasing, which presents a risk as one does not want to spend all of their money on music making equipment without being able to realise its potential. Obviously this can vary artistically, person to person, creator to creator, but I, myself as creator, consider technology the megaphone through which the quality of my compositions or musical creations can be amplified. Therefore, if I am working at the capacity of a lesser technology and move on to a more advanced one, then the quality of my work will more greatly be amplified, sort of like a multiplier effect in video games. So, what will we be learning to enable us to create the best with more? One of the main things that we will be working on, unsurprisingly, is the basics or fundamental techniques of MIDI orchestration, although crucially, we'll be working on those skills which are still important when using more up-to-date libraries. This is important as while we are using stock instruments in this course as a kind of leveler of the playing field, we obviously want to be arming ourselves with those skills that can be amplified or multiplied when we do invest in better sample instruments later on. The use of stock instruments is important in relation to two other things that we will be learning. For example, we want to squeeze all the expressivity we can out of the instruments we are working with, so as to increase their perceived realism. Stock instruments force us to work harder to achieve this and also apply techniques manually that a lot of modern libraries are programmed to do semi-automatically, so we get to learn them more deeply. For instance, layering different velocity bands allows us to create deeper dynamic changes, replicating acoustic properties of real instruments more closely. And this is important in relation to the last point as well. It's important, especially if the aim of the MIDI orchestration is realism, to consider and understand performance and instrumental idiosyncrasies and limitations. That was a mouthful, and I'm about to say it again. Idiosyncrasies are essentially characteristics of instruments, and to create something idiosyncratic is to create something that plays to the strengths of those characteristics. In other words, if I was writing for violin, I wouldn't write for the violin as I might write for, say, the clarinet or the trumpet. So that's what I mean by idiosyncratic in this case. All of these work towards the ambition of creating more realistic orchestral mock-ups, no matter the limitations of our resources. Creating effective realistic mock-ups can be a hugely important skill for many musicians, especially composers wanting to go into MIDI composition. So, how will we be achieving this? Or, what will the course look like and focus on so as to reach those previous learning objectives? The focus will be on applying the skills in practice, so I will often demonstrate various techniques that are working towards the mock-up of an actual piece of music. Therefore, by the end of each part of the course, you should have a MIDI orchestrated version or extract from a classical piece of music which you have created yourself. The reason I use classical pieces is so that you can share them however you wish without copyright issues. In the course, I use MIDI files which I provide, although there is the possibility to source your own to work on later in the process as part of your final assignments, and also just for general practice beyond this course. We also work with stock instruments. This, as I said in passing earlier, is to force us to work harder on our skills to get them sounding realistic. This is so that we can create MIDI orchestrations no matter the limitations we might be facing. This process, and also the latter assignments, seek to develop techniques for further progressing your skills beyond the course. I don't believe good teaching is about spoon-feeding information, but rather encouraging students to work independently. This is important here, as you are the one who will have to make your MIDI orchestrations in the future. Furthermore, you can never know too much in relation to MIDI orchestration. In making this course, I learned a lot about the potential of stock instruments, something I would not have done otherwise had I not made this course. Just to clarify, stock instruments, which I've mentioned a few times now, they are it's basically a means of saying those sample instruments that come with your digital audio workstation. To quickly offer an outline to the course, in the first section we will be working on a solo piano piece to introduce us to the first set of MIDI controllers, such as sustain pedal and a concept called humanization. We'll also be working with velocity. We'll also look at how we might use tempo changes to shape a MIDI performance. And by the end of this section you will have created a MIDI realization of Chopin's Prelude No. 20 in C minor. In the second section, we'll look at how to program brass and percussion MIDI using velocity and the layering of multiple tracks to create greater and smoother dynamic shifts on sustained instruments. To apply these skills, I have extracted part of the well-known brass chorale from the last movement of Mahler's Second Symphony. In the third section, we will introduce the concept of round robin and how we achieve this with stock instruments. We'll also look much more with different articulations as a means of creating a more vibrant and realistic performance. In this section, we will be working on the exposition of the first movement to Beethoven's Wind Octet in E flat. In the final section, we will work on Grieg's Anitra's Dance from, I think it was Peer Gynt Suite No. 1, applying everything we have learned, seeking to gain greater fluidity, ready for the assignments. It will also introduce the need for many different articulations, particularly in the first violin part. Structuring the course around the instrumental families allows us to focus on their idiosyncrasies, or their family-specific characteristics even more, preparing us for the two assignments. Assignment 1 is open, designed for me to demonstrate how you might go about continuing your learning beyond the course by sourcing MIDI files and, should it be helpful, musical scores. It's actually going to be the video I shoot next, after doing this introduction, and I think I'm planning on doing the rondo from the third movement, the final movement of Mozart's Fourth Horn Concerto. You'll recognise it, I'm sure, when I do the video. Assignment 2 is to create a MIDI realization of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Not the entirety of it, unless you want to, and are able to find a full MIDI file, but the opening to the second act, for which I have provided a MIDI file, just as I have for all the other pieces mentioned. Lastly, it's probably best to consider prerequisites. I've tried to design the course to be as accessible as possible, while also being designed to push any skill level from beginner or advanced. In this case, I mean the skill level of MIDI orchestration. That being said, you will need a digital audio workstation, ideally one with stock instruments within it. I do the course in GarageBand, and while DAWs tend to be similar, to use another DAW would probably require enough fluidity in using that specific DAW so as to interpret or translate my actions. There is no real need to read music, although I use scores in this myself, just because I find it personally helpful. That's not a requirement. You don't need to be able to understand notation, although I will try and describe some things to think about in relation to when I have a score on screen, which I'm using. Other than that, there's not much else, so I hope you enjoy the course.